Yo, so the bearded girl. That is our film today. It is from Jody Wilson, right? Who wrote and directed it. The film is produced by Amber Ripley and Jody Wilson. Executive produced by Heath Stang, David Shepard, Sarah Shark, Gemma Martini, Zoid Kirsch, and Al Dye, with Michael Gorlick on post-production producing. Kane McKenzie was on music. Francis Daganese took care of cinematography. Frederick Fawnson edits the piece, with Danny Vermette production design. Set decoration is Trevor Johnson. Hair and makeup, we have Tia Dumesk, Deborah Johnson, Heather Kopicki, Brianna Scott. Who else do we have? Okay, Will Erickson, Zandura Kennedy, and Reese Williams. They handled all our stunts. Okay, so the cast, who was in this? Well, we have Lady Andre, played by Jessica Parr. There is Lady Andre's mother, Rosemary, played by Betty Jackson. And Lady Andre has two kids, right? There's Josephine, played by Skylar Radzion, and Cleo, played by Anwen O'Driscoll. A younger version of Josephine is played by Ava Anton. Okay. We don't have the younger version of Cleo down. So there's Jude Wilson, and Brendan Riley play brothers. But I forget one's Bob, I forget the other one's name. There's, who else do we have here? We've got Newton, played by Linden Porco. Blaze, played by Keenan Tracy. There's Harold, played by Toby Hargrave. Jay, played by Austin Trapp. Dick Sutherland, played by Jeff Gladstone. The Masked Cowboy, right, played by Harrison Brown. Madam Tilly, the fortune teller, played by Kenneth Wyse. We got the Doctor, played by Winston One. Cliff the Cowboy Businessman, played by Robert Hackersley. So that is our cast. Now, this was based on a story by Blake Barrie and Thiago Gadelha. Yeah, and it was Jody's feature directorial debut. Right, so there's a lot going on here. And from the bearded girl, right? You go, what's this gonna be about, right? What's it gonna be about? Now, and also is like, is that a metaphor, like, for something? What's the, and no, it's kind of using the backdrop of a circus, and you have this lineage, right? The bearded woman. and it's kind of passed down, but it's not necessarily every woman in the bloodline gets this thing, you know. It's this heritage, it's this tradition. But what if, you know, you don't want to be confined by tradition, right? You want to move the goalposts slightly, right? You want to bring a bit of yourself into it, because it's this journey. That's what this film is, right? It's a journey of Cleo and feeling trapped within something and having to find who she actually is, right? Because we rebel against things, but then in that rebellion, you can go completely in the other direction, right? How many times you have people brought up in a strict household and they, you know, alcohol isn't a thing, right? Cigarettes aren't a thing, and then they leave and they become like hooked on cigarettes. They're drinking every night, right? Because it's that 180 rebellion, you know, and it's all about finding that happy medium in things, in what we do. And so Cleo has to navigate the world, has to, you know, find who she actually is, right? And find happiness in that thing, right? Because it's when you're pushing it away, denying yourself, you're still living in a lie, right? So it's immersing yourself in the reality of who you actually are, right? And that's what we get here, and it's super interesting, you know what I mean? It's super interesting. We get these very rich characters, you know, like even when we don't necessarily see them a lot, right? Josephine, she's, you know, the sister, but also this character that is, you know, a mirror of Cleo, right? She's the opposite of Cleo. She's very confident. She knows who she is, but she's not having to try and find a way within a tradition necessarily. But she's very loving, right? And supportive as well. So you have this great character in Josephine that we get to see. You know, even the twins. I have to say, at first, I did not realize they were conjoined. I just thought they were standing very close together. You know what I mean? And I realized, just a bit when they're lying down, and then I was just like, hold on a second. But no, it's a really interesting piece, and the characters are all very believable, even though they are, you know, working on this circus, and so, you know, they are kind of larger than life in some, you know, in some ways. You buy the relationship between Cleo and Josephine. You buy the relationship between both of them and Lady Andre, right? Their mum. You know, all of these relationships feel real. And that is super important, because they've got to feel real. You've got to be able to buy it, right? The Blaze character, you buy Blaze, right? We've known a Blaze. And it's also very interesting with Blaze, because it's like, at first, it's like, oh, is there this acceptance here, right? But then you have to look and go, okay, right? Because the things that are accepted are the things that, you know, maybe aren't necessarily the reality, right? So it's interesting because, it's one of those things, right? It's easy to be happy when you're rich and everything's going well. So what happens with a shift? That's when we really see who people are. So we get those interesting dynamics of the film, and everyone plays these characters really, really well, Everyone does a very good job of them, of bringing life to everyone, right? Again, there's certain characters we don't see a lot of, but Brendan Riley and Jude Wilson do a very good job with their characters, right? Of bringing life into them, of like Linden Porco with Newton, right? Betty Jackson with Rosemary, Toby Hargrave with Harold, just all of these characters formed. Even the dastardly Dick Sutherland, Jeff Gladstone, what he does with Dick is good. So we have all of that, right? And it's, it's that interesting thing because this is, the bearded lady, that is a thing, right? Because it's what do you call it? It's part of polycystic ovary syndrome, where the the body produces an elevated amount of male hormones. Because this is the thing, females do have testosterone, right? Just not at the same level as a dude. And so you sometimes have these things where there's an elevated level of testosterone. And with PCOS, right, polycystic ovary syndrome, you get a load of testosterone, which then means that a female will be able to grow a beard and have an excess of body hair. And what was interesting was that, the females only had beards, right? There's not a whole load of other body hair. But, I guess when you're trying to put all of this together, right, you're just like, okay, what's the easiest thing to do here? You know what I mean? So, that's just a small little thing, but it is based on a reality, a real situation, which, it has that other element of realism to this fantasy, to this story, which again, interesting, because it is that accepting oneself, and I think that is this underlining thread that goes throughout the story and is beautifully realized, as we go all the way through. There was one bit where I was a little confused, but that was only because there's a bit and we get a time jump. And so on the screen, it says what it is, but it's written in script, and I struggle with script. So I thought it said one thing, and then I'm watching the film, and I'm like, yo, but the timeline doesn't make any sense. And then I went back, and I was like, oh. I paused it, and then I read it, and I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense now. But yes, the bearded lady is playing at Fantasia International Festival. That's where it's having its world premiere. Woo! It's playing alongside Sounds of Glass, right? And its first screening is the 17th of July. And it will then screen again on the 18th of July. Right? So yeah, that's it. The bearded lady. The Bearded Girl, even. Sorry, the Bearded Girl. We will put on the website any other dates that we have of this film. Because it's a lovely little story, and it's well worth checking out. So keep an eye on the socials and everything like that, because if it is playing anywhere near you, people, you'll want to give it a try. So a very good first film from Jody Wilson and all the cast involved, who did a splendid job. The Bearded Girl.